Entitled sisters demanded my vacation home for profit. When I refused, they broke in and destroyed it. Hey Reddit, I'm Mark, 35, and I'm still reeling from what my sisters just did. I have two younger sisters, Jessica, 32, and Megan, 29, who have always had a sense of entitlement that's caused more than a few family dramas over the years. But this time, they took it way too far. They demanded that I let them rent out my vacation home for extra cash, and when I refused, Jessica broke in and trashed the place. Here's how my dream of having a peaceful getaway turned into a nightmare I never saw coming. Growing up, I was the oldest of 3 kids. My parents, Linda and Frank, worked hard to give us a good life, but things were always tight. My dad was a truck driver who spent a lot of time on the road, and my mom worked as a nurse, juggling night shifts to make ends meet. We didn't have much, but my parents did their best to give us a stable home. They were loving but often overwhelmed, and as the oldest, I took on a lot of responsibility. From a young age, I was expected to be the man of the house whenever my dad was away. I helped with the chores, looked after my sisters, and did my best to ease the burden on my mom. Jessica and Megan, on the other hand, got away with just about anything. They were the babies of the family, and my parents spoiled them whenever they could. I can't tell you how many times I heard, "They're just little, Mark, they don't know any better," even when Jessica was 15 and throwing tantrums if things didn't go her way. Jessica was the popular one in school, always involved in sports, student government, and the latest drama with her friends. She loved being the center of attention and had a knack for getting what she wanted, whether it was the latest iPhone or her friends doing her homework. She could charm her way out of trouble with teachers and get her way with my parents just by batting her eyelashes. Megan, the youngest, was quieter but just as manipulative in her own way. She was the sweet talker, the one who'd smile and say, "I didn't mean to," and somehow always managed to dodge consequences. My parents couldn't say no to her, and she knew it. I remember one specific incident when I was 16, Jessica was 13, and Megan was 10. We were at the mall, and Jessica got caught trying to shoplift a pair of earrings. The store called my mom, and instead of facing any real punishment, Jessica managed to convince her that it was all just a misunderstanding. She put on the waterworks, and Mom fell for it. Meanwhile, I was the one lectured about not keeping an eye on them. It was always like that. I was the one expected to be responsible while my sisters got away with anything and everything. As we grew older, those dynamics didn't change much. Jessica became a real estate agent, always chasing the next big sale, and Megan drifted through a series of odd jobs, never sticking to anything for long. I went to college on a scholarship, worked part-time jobs, and eventually started my own business, a small but successful tech consulting firm. I'd always been the responsible one, saving my money and investing wisely. After years of hard work, I was finally able to afford something I dreamed of since I was a kid, a vacation home by the lake. The cabin wasn't anything extravagant, but it was perfect. Nestled in the woods by a serene lake, it was my sanctuary, a place where I could unwind, fish, read, and escape the stress of everyday life. I'd been saving for years to buy it, and when I finally closed on it, I felt like I'd achieved something truly special. It was a small, 2-bedroom cabin with rustic charm, wooden beams, a stone fireplace, and a wraparound porch with a view that took my breath away every time I looked at it. It was my reward for all the late nights, the sacrifices, and the constant grind of running my own business. I spent months fixing it up, putting my personal touch on everything. I installed new appliances, redid the plumbing, and even built a fire pit out back where I could sit and watch the stars. I laid down a new stone path leading to the dock, sanded and stained the deck, and even planted a small garden with wildflowers and herbs. It was my pride and joy, and I cherished every moment I spent there. I'd invite friends over for weekend barbecues, fishing trips, and quiet nights by the fire. It was everything I'd ever wanted, and I felt incredibly lucky to have it. When I bought the cabin, I was proud not just of the house itself but of the journey it represented. For years, I had struggled financially, trying to make ends meet while my sisters were out partying and enjoying life. I skipped vacations, worked overtime, and lived in modest apartments while saving every penny. My family often mocked me for being so frugal, with Jessica joking that I was saving for the apocalypse. but I knew what I was working towards. The cabin was a symbol of all that hard work finally paying off. My friends and colleagues would often comment on how they envied my little getaway, and I always welcomed them for fishing trips or just to relax by the fire. It was my way of sharing the joy and tranquility the cabin brought me. I loved seeing the look on people's faces when they walked in and saw the view of the lake, the way the sunlight streamed through the big windows in the morning, and the cozy warmth of the fireplace on cool nights. It was my sanctuary, my retreat from the world. But then, my sisters started showing interest. At first, it was innocent enough. Jessica would drop hints about how cute the cabin was and how she'd love to spend a weekend there. Megan would comment on my Instagram posts with heart eye emojis and little comments like, "Can't wait to visit." I didn't think much of it. I was happy to have them come up for a visit, and I figured they were just excited about my success. The first time they visited, I could tell they were impressed. They both wandered around the cabin, admiring the decor, commenting on the cozy setup, and making themselves right at home. Jessica went on about how she loved the rustic chic vibe, and Megan was already planning Instagram photoshoots on the porch. I grilled some steaks, we had a few drinks, and for once, it felt like we were just a normal family. Jessica even joked about how she should get a cabin like this one day, and Megan chimed in with ideas about themed weekends they could host there. I laughed it off, thinking they were just talking. But then, the requests started getting more frequent and more demanding. One afternoon, I was having lunch with my sisters at a local diner when Jessica brought up the cabin again. She'd been going on about her latest real estate deal, bragging about a big commission she'd landed, when she suddenly turned to me with that look she always got when she wanted something. "Mark, you know what would be great? If you let me and Megan use the cabin for a few weekends," she said casually, stirring her iced tea. "We could get away, relax, maybe even host a little girls' weekend. You wouldn't even know we were there." Megan nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, Mark, it would be so fun. And we'd take great care of it, promise." I hesitated. It wasn't that I didn't want them to enjoy the cabin, but I knew my sisters. They were messy, careless, and had a habit of taking things without asking. Jessica was always spilling wine, and Megan never cleaned up after herself. The thought of them treating my carefully maintained cabin like one of their sloppy apartments made me uneasy. But I didn't want to be the bad guy, so I tried to set some boundaries. "I don't mind if you guys go up for a weekend or two," I said cautiously. "But please, just make sure you clean up after yourselves and treat the place with respect." Jessica waved her hand dismissively. "Of course, Mark. We're not kids. We can handle it." At first, things seemed fine. They went up one weekend, and though they left the place a bit messier than I would have liked, it wasn't anything I couldn't fix with a bit of cleaning. But then they started asking more frequently. Jessica would call or text, hinting at how great it would be to spend the weekend at the cabin. Megan started talking about planning bigger gatherings, like birthday parties and friends' weekends, asking if she could invite a few people up. I tried to keep things light, setting limits but still letting them enjoy the space occasionally. But what I didn't know was that Jessica and Megan had already been scheming behind my back. Jessica, always the business-minded one, had been eyeing my cabin not just as a getaway but as an opportunity. She'd recently started managing short-term rentals on the side, using her real estate connections to make extra cash, and she saw my cabin as her next big venture. Megan, easily swayed by Jessica's grand ideas, was all in. She loved the idea of being part of something big and basked in the attention Jessica promised her. The next weekend, while I was at the cabin, Jessica called me. I could tell from her tone that she was in full sales pitch mode. "Mark, I've been thinking," she began, her voice dripping with enthusiasm. "I could help you make some serious money with that cabin. We could rent it out when you're not using it, weekends, holidays, whatever. I have all the contacts, and we'd split the profits. You wouldn't have to do a thing." I was stunned. I knew Jessica was always looking for ways to make a quick buck, but I never thought she'd try to use my cabin to do it. I politely declined, explaining that the cabin was my personal space, my sanctuary, and I wasn't interested in renting it out to strangers. I'd bought it for my own peace of mind, not to turn it into a business venture. Jessica wasn't happy. Come on, Mark. You're sitting on a goldmine, and you're just letting it go to waste. You're being selfish. That word stung. Selfish. I'd spent my whole life working hard, saving every penny, and building something for myself, and now my own sister was accusing me of being selfish because I didn't want to rent out my personal space. I told her no again, more firmly this time, and ended the call. But Jessica wasn't one to take no for an answer. Over the next few weeks, she kept pushing, sending me articles about how lucrative short-term rentals could be and texting me links to Airbnb listings in the area. She even showed up unannounced at my house one evening with a bottle of wine and a whole presentation on how much money we could make. Think about it, Mark, she said, waving her arms animatedly. This could be huge for both of us. You don't have to do anything. I'll handle all the bookings, the cleaning, the guests, you just sit back and collect the cash. I could see the greed in her eyes, the way she was already counting the money she thought she'd make off my hard work. I took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. Jessica, I appreciate the offer, but the answer is no. The cabin isn't for rent. It's my home away from home, and I don't want strangers in it. Jessica's smile faded, replaced by a look of frustration. Fine, she huffed, grabbing her things and storming out. But you're missing out. Megan was more subtle but persistent. She'd drop hints in our conversations, asking if she could host just one more party or if she could have her friends over just this once. She'd call me while she was shopping for home decor, asking if I thought certain items would look cute at the cabin, clearly trying to involve herself more in my space. I had to keep setting the record straight, this was my cabin, and it wasn't a rental property. Megan would always sound disappointed, but I could tell she was feeding everything back to Jessica, who was the mastermind behind their push. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. The situation escalated a few weeks later when Megan called me, sounding uncharacteristically serious. Mark, can we talk? It's about the cabin, she said, her voice tinged with anxiety. I sighed, already knowing where this was headed. Megan, if this is about renting it out. No, it's not just that, she interrupted. Jessica's really upset. She's been talking about how you're wasting an opportunity, and honestly, I kind of see her point. I mean, it's just sitting there most of the time, and you're not using it. Why not let us help you make some money? I was getting fed up. It felt like I was being ambushed from all sides. I told Megan the same thing I told Jessica, the cabin was off limits, and I wasn't interested in turning it into a business. But Megan, ever the peacekeeper, tried to guilt-trip me into reconsidering. Don't you want to help your family, Mark, she asked, her voice dripping with a mix of manipulation and disappointment. Jessica's been struggling with her job, and I'm barely making ends meet. We could really use this. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were trying to make their problems my responsibility, and I was tired of it. I told Megan that while I loved them both, my answer was final. The cabin was not up for rent, and I wasn't going to let them use it to make a quick buck. Megan hung up in a huff, and I figured that was the last I'd hear about it. But Jessica wasn't done. A few days later, I found out that she'd been talking to our parents, complaining about how unreasonable I was being and painting herself as the victim. My mom called me, parroting Jessica's arguments about how I was wasting the cabin and how much it could help the family. It felt like a coordinated attack, and I was furious. Mark, why are you being so stubborn about this? My mom asked during one of our heated phone calls. Your sisters are just trying to help. It's not like you're there all the time. What's the harm in letting them use it? It's not about that, Mom, I shot back, struggling to keep my temper in check. It's about respect. It's my property, and I get to decide what happens with it. They're trying to pressure me into something I don't want to do, and you're enabling it. But they're your sisters, my mom pleaded. We're family. We should be helping each other, not fighting over stuff like this. My dad, who'd always been the more reasonable of my parents, tried to mediate. Mark, maybe just let them use it for a bit. You don't have to rent it out, but at least let them enjoy it too. I was stunned by the betrayal. Dad, I worked my ass off for that cabin. It's mine, and I get to decide what happens with it. They don't get to dictate that just because they want something. My dad sighed, clearly caught between his kids. I get it, Mark. I really do. But you know how your sisters are. They're just trying to figure things out. Can't you just meet them halfway? But I knew there was no halfway with Jessica and Megan. It was all or nothing, and they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. I ended the call feeling drained, frustrated, and more alone than ever. Things reached a boiling point a week later. I was at work when I got an alert on my phone from the security system at the cabin. The camera showed Jessica's car parked out front, and I watched in disbelief as she and Megan used a spare key I'd given them years ago to let themselves in. I immediately called Jessica, but she didn't pick up. I called Megan next, and she answered, sounding defensive. We just wanted to take a look around, Mark. It's no big deal. No big deal? I yelled. You're trespassing. Get out of my house right now. I drove up to the cabin that night, furious and ready to confront them. But nothing could have prepared me for what I found. The place was trashed, furniture overturned, dishes broken, beer bottles scattered everywhere. It looked like they'd thrown a party and completely lost control. The pristine sanctuary I'd worked so hard to create was now a wreck. Jessica was sitting on the porch, her eyes glazed and unapologetic. Megan was inside, trying to clean up the mess, but it was too little, too late. I confronted Jessica, demanding to know what the hell she was thinking. Relax, Mark, she said, slurring slightly. We were just having some fun. You're so uptight about this place. It's just a cabin. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Just a cabin? I shouted. Do you have any idea how hard I worked for this? This isn't some playground for you to trash whenever you feel like it. Megan tried to intervene, her voice wavering as she tried to justify their actions. We just thought. I don't know, Mark, we didn't think it would be a big deal. Jessica was upset, and we just wanted to have a good time. You wanted a good time at my expense, I fired back. This isn't just about the mess. This is about respect or the total lack of it. You both knew how much this place means to me, and you went behind my back anyway. Jessica, still unfazed, just rolled her eyes. God, Mark, you're so dramatic. It's not like we burned the place down. Stop acting like we committed a crime. You did, Jessica, I said, my voice shaking with rage. You broke in. You vandalized my property. And you still don't get it. As they drove away, I stood in the wreckage of what was supposed to be my peaceful escape. I'd spent years building this place, pouring my time, money, and heart into it, and my own sisters had destroyed it in one reckless night. Update 1, Picking up the pieces, the aftermath. The days after the break-in were some of the hardest I've ever experienced. I spent hours cleaning up the mess, repairing the damage, and trying to restore the cabin to its former state. It wasn't just the physical work that was exhausting, it was the emotional toll of knowing that my own family had betrayed me so deeply. Every time I picked up a broken dish or scrubbed a stain off the floor, I felt the sting of their disrespect. It wasn't just the cabin that felt trashed, it was the trust I'd put in my sisters. I filed a police report, not because I wanted to press charges against my sisters, but because I needed to document what had happened. I hoped that maybe, just maybe, the threat of legal consequences would make Jessica and Megan realize how serious this was. But when the police called Jessica to ask about the break-in, she played it off like it was no big deal, claiming that she had every right to be there because it was family property. The damage to the cabin was more than just cosmetic. They had spilled alcohol all over the hardwood floors, left cigarette burns on the furniture, and even managed to break a window. The place smelled like stale beer and smoke, a far cry from the peaceful haven I had worked so hard to create. I spent every free moment over the next few weeks trying to restore it, working late into the night to get it back to how it was. The whole time, I was battling a mix of rage, sadness, and betrayal. I couldn't believe her audacity. Family property? The cabin was mine, purchased with my money and maintained with my hard work. But in Jessica's mind, anything I had was fair game for her to use as she pleased. The entitlement was staggering. My parents tried to mediate, but their attempts only made things worse. My mom kept telling me to forgive and forget and that Jessica was just going through a rough patch. She blamed me for escalating things by involving the police, saying that I was blowing everything out of proportion. "You're all family," my mom pleaded. "We need to stick together, not fight over material things." Material things. That's all this was to them. But for me, the cabin represented so much more. It was my independence, my peace, my reward for years of hard work. I refused to back down, telling my parents that Jessica and Megan were no longer welcome at the cabin and that I was changing the locks and upgrading the security system. Jessica, of course, was livid. She called me, screaming about how I'd betrayed the family and that I was holding a grudge over nothing. She even threatened to take me to court, claiming that she had a right to use the cabin because it was part of the family. I laughed in disbelief and hung up, blocking her number. I was done with the drama, done with their entitlement, and done with trying to reason with people who couldn't see beyond their own selfish desires. My dad, seeing the mess that the situation had become, tried to reason with me once more. He came over one evening, sitting with me on my back porch as I vented about everything that had happened. "You know they're just being themselves, Mark," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "They don't think about the consequences." "And that's exactly the problem, Dad," I shot back. "They never have to. You and Mom have always let them off the hook, and now look where it's gotten us." My dad nodded, his eyes filled with a sadness I hadn't seen before. "I know we haven't handled things right. I know we let them walk all over you, and I'm sorry for that. I never thought it would come to this." We sat in silence for a while, staring out at the yard. For a moment, it felt like we were both mourning something, the family we once had, the peace that was now shattered, and the relationships that might never be the same again. Update 2, moving forward, setting boundaries and finding peace. It's been a few months since the break-in, and I'm still dealing with the fallout. Jessica hasn't spoken to me since that last blow-up, and Megan has been trying to play the peacemaker, urging me to forgive Jessica and let her back into my life. Megan's calls have become a regular occurrence, usually filled with her tearfully recounting Jessica's latest sob story, how she's struggling with her job, how she's just so stressed, and how I'm making things worse by refusing to reconcile. "Mark, she's sorry," Megan pleaded one night. "She just doesn't know how to say it. She's under so much pressure, and she really needs us right now. But I've made it clear that my boundaries are non-negotiable. My cabin is my space, and I won't let anyone, family or not, disrespect what I've worked so hard to build." I told Megan that if she wanted to stay in touch, she'd need to respect my decision and stop trying to guilt-trip me into forgiving Jessica. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it was necessary. Megan finally agreed, though I could tell she was upset. For the first time, she was caught between her loyalty to her sister and her desire to keep peace within the family. I've invested in a new security system, complete with cameras, motion sensors, and remote monitoring. I've changed the locks, added reinforced doors, and even put up a fence around the property. It's overkill, maybe, but I can't afford to feel vulnerable in my own space again. I've also taken a step back from my family, focusing on my business, my friends, and the things that bring me joy. It's been a painful process, but I'm learning to prioritize my peace over the toxic demands of others. The cabin is slowly getting back to its former glory. I've repainted, replaced damaged furniture, and added new touches that make it feel even more like my sanctuary. I spent a weekend redoing the fire pit, adding new stones and even some outdoor lighting to make the space feel inviting again. Every time I spend a weekend there, I feel a sense of calm that I can't find anywhere else. It's my reminder that I don't need to bend to anyone's will, that I have the right to protect what's mine, and that I'm stronger than the entitled demands of my sisters. I've also started to make new memories there, hosting friends and even throwing a few small gatherings to reclaim the space. It's been healing to see the cabin filled with laughter and good times, to replace the bad memories with new, positive ones. I'm still careful about who I invite, but those who come are respectful and appreciative of the space. It's a small but important step in reclaiming my sanctuary. As for my family, I've kept my distance. My parents still call, sometimes hinting that it's time to let bygones be bygones, but I've made it clear that my boundaries aren't up for negotiation. My mom still tries to guilt-trip me occasionally, telling me that Jessica just needs help and that I'm being too harsh. But I know better. Helping her now would only reinforce her belief that she can do whatever she wants without consequence. Jessica has yet to apologize, and honestly, I don't expect her to. She's too wrapped up in her own sense of entitlement to ever admit she was wrong. But that's on her, not me. I've realized that I can't change her, and I've stopped trying. Megan and I still talk occasionally, but I've kept our conversations light and away from the topic of Jessica or the cabin. There are still moments when I feel the sting of what happened. Sometimes, when I'm sitting on the porch with a coffee in hand, looking out at the lake, I'll catch myself thinking about the night I found the cabin in shambles. It's a reminder of how fragile trust can be, and how quickly it can be broken. But it's also a reminder of my resilience, of my ability to rebuild, reclaim, and keep moving forward. To anyone dealing with entitled family members who think they have a claim on your life, your success, or your hard work, don't let them guilt you into giving up what you've earned. Set boundaries, enforce them, and don't apologize for putting yourself first. You deserve to enjoy the fruits of your labor without feeling obligated to share them with people who only see your achievements as opportunities for themselves. Thanks for listening, Reddit. I'm still navigating this mess, but I'm doing it on my own terms, and that's all I've ever wanted.